Previously on Dark Side of the Ring.
If you're a wrestling fan, how could you not be a fan of Chris Benoit's work?
With a headbutt directly to the heart.
This is my favorite page because this is the love that Chris and Nancy always had.
Chris was always very much a great father, very much about his family.
He was my hero, you know? I looked up to him.
I have never, ever seen a closer friendship as I did between Chris and Eddie.
Eddie Guerrero has passed away.
My next thought was, oh my God, Chris.
I love you, Eddie. He didn't handle it well. Let me just say it like that.
Nancy started getting really worried. She's like, I'm really worried for Chris. I just had this really bad feeling.
We have more for you now on a developing story in Fayette County, the deaths of a pro wrestler and his family.
In the immediate wake of Chris Benoit's death, the world is desperately searching for answers. What comes to light goes beyond anything anyone could imagine.
People just couldn't believe it, couldn't fathom that something like that could happen.
It can't be real. Like, where's my nephew?
That can't have happened because the person that I knew would not do this horrific thing.
But I think this is going to be gigantic. This will affect WWE.
Well, the question is, was he on steroids at this time?
Did the blows to the head Benoit received in the wrestling ring fundamentally change his brain?
It really, really was the darkest time of my life.
For a family atmosphere. Not a whole lot of crime. It's pretty peaceful. My name is Larry Alden. I was with the Fayette County Sheriff's Office. I was lieutenant in charge of the shift that was working the day of the Benoit incident. I had been a detective for about 15 or 20 years. I'd probably see Chris Benoit once or twice a week at the gym, which was right in the middle of Fayetteville. He didn't talk a lot, and he was pretty focused on getting his workout in. I never heard anything about him. I didn't even know where he lived at until the call came out on the radio that day.
My name is Dennis Fagan. I run the security for World Wrestling, and one of our wrestlers that lives down there is missing.
And what's his name?
Chris Benoit.
Okay, and he's a wrestler?
Yes, what happened, he's a very religious gentleman, and yesterday he was supposed to show up at a pay-per-view and never got on the plane, never showed up. It's out of character for him.
All right, we'll go ahead and send somebody out there to check on him. If you want to call us back in like 45 minutes or so. If he's there, we'll tell him to give you a call.
I was in my patrol car just riding around the county, and it was pretty close to the area when the call went out. I wasn't thinking of anything other than a welfare check, or maybe he was sick, maybe drunk, didn't really know what. I pulled up on scene about the time the neighbor was walking over, and I walked up to them, and I asked if she had seen Mr. Benoit or anybody. And she said, it's been 3 or 4 days since I've seen anybody over there. There was 2 large canines in the yard. If I remember correctly, they were German Shepherds. We asked her if there was any place she could put the dogs at so we could go up there and do the welfare check. And she said, oh yeah, me and the dogs get along great. I feed them whenever they're out of town. And she jumped the fence, dogs right there with her. She walked them in there, never had to take a hold to them. It was taking a little longer than I thought it should take. But then she came running out the door, screaming that Daniel's dead, Daniel's dead. I went from just being a regular welfare check, okay, we got something more serious here. We crossed the fence at that time, myself and Deputy Mundy, and we made entry through the side door, which she had left open. We drew our weapons, not knowing what we was gonna come upon. It was daylight, and they had plenty of windows in the house, so you had a lot of light coming in. There was an odor in the house. And I looked over at Deputy Mundy and said, something is dead in here. There was a set of stairs going up to a bedroom. So we went up those steps, and sure enough, that's where the juvenile child was at, laying in bed. I noticed the child was laying on the bed face down. Deputy Mundy said, do we need to start CPR? And I said, no. He'd passed away. We started clearing all the different rooms and doors. We found another room, and that's where we found Miss Benoit at. She was laying on the floor, and she was wrapped up in a blanket or maybe a rug or something like that. Went downstairs to the basement area, which was a couple of large open rooms. And the last door we opened was the gym door. and that's where Mr. Benoit was at. Because of the mirrors and at the angle Deputy Mundy was at to my right, she saw the reflection at the far end of the room, which might have been 5 to 7, 10 feet away from where he actually was. And she started to say, "Show me your hands, Fayette County Sheriff's Department." She could not see. He had cable from one of his weight machines around his neck and had some weights on it. That's when I told her, I said, "He's sitting right here, he's passed away." Radio had called us, asked if everything was okay, and I told them on the radio that looked like it might be a homicide and suicide. It was within 2 or 3 minutes of us walking back outside that somebody had already strung crime scene tape across the front of the property.
I was at the gym, and I remember I was driving home. My son was with me, and I got a call from one of the writers from WWE who called me and said, "Are you sitting down?" I'm like, "What's going on here, dude?" And that's when he said, "Chris is dead." And I said, "What? Chris who?" And he says, "Chris Benoit." And I pulled over on the side of the road, and I just started bawling. And I remember my son, he said, "Daddy, you cry funny." I was just crying, I was bawling.
At this time, no one knew what happened, so WWE is just thinking that Chris Benoit has passed away, along with Nancy and Daniel. You're not trying to put together that, okay, did someone break in? Did carbon monoxide happen? What's going on? You just know that these two of your friends are gone, and no one has answers.
Vince McMahon, the chairman of the board, couldn't go on the air and not do anything. So we went on the air and did what we thought was right.
Tonight, this arena here in Corpus Christi, Texas, was to have been filled to capacity with enthusiastic WWE fans.
We tried to honor the guy, we tried to honor his family, tried to honor his fans, but we didn't have a full story. Shame on us for that, I guess.
So tonight will be a 3-hour tribute to one of the greatest WWE superstars of all time.
We just know that Chris Benoit is no longer with us, and neither is his family. Of course, I'm going to pay tribute to my friend.
And I would trust you with me, with my life, with my kids' lives. Because I know you, Chris. I know your heart.
Yeah, they called me and asked me if I wanted to be on it, and I was like, absolutely not. I remember just sitting there, like, just watching, like, dead, with a bottle of vodka, just drinking, like, you know, because Eddie's was bad. This was worse.
Chris Benoit was not only one of the greatest wrestlers I ever saw, but he was one of the best friends I ever had in this business.
We did not know all the information. That's our fault. We were trying to serve the audience. It was a major story. It was hitting all the news sources, and we had a TV show. We wanted to update people on what the hell was going on. But we didn't have all the information. But we didn't know we didn't have all the information. We were told from the authorities, here's what happened. Oh, guess what? We were wrong. This is not what happened.
Chris was the type of guy you'd want to go to war with.
It was hard because at that time, so guys were, you know, in their speeches, you know, praising Chris.
Because Chris Benoit was my hero.
I love you, Chris.
It's interesting to me because when I watched the Raw tribute and everybody was talking about Benoit and how great a performer he was and how amazing he was, but I thought Regal's words on that night were very revealing.
Now all I'm willing to say is that Chris Benoit was undoubtedly the hardest working man in professional wrestling.
And when you talk to him afterwards, you find out he lived in the same city as Chris and knew a lot about whatever fights Nancy and him had or whatever Chris was going through at the time. And I'm not sure if a lot of people would have noticed it, but knowing what I knew about him, I started thinking, wow, this is not good.
My sister had told me to spoil myself and go to the mall and get some makeup and have some wine with lunch and go watch a movie. And I came out of the theater and I turned my phone on and I had like 22 missed calls from my parents. And my parents made sure they wouldn't tell me anything. They wanted me to be parked in my driveway and inside my house before they told me. And that's how I found out. And then when it finally sunk in, I just absolutely lost control of myself. It was very difficult. Very difficult. I had to go to the hospital and be sedated.
I was in Edmonton, and then this number kept calling. My mom's cell phone, unknown number, unknown number. unknown number. And then she finally answered it, and it was the police, RCMP. So we left, rolled down to the station. She found out first. I see her crying there. She couldn't spit it out, so. The cop told me that they all passed away over the weekend. I punched them in the chest. And then me and the cop went for a walk. We talked. And that, you know, your dad loved you. They all loved you. And I thought it was a joke. I really did.
It wasn't until after the show and after the fact that all the details started coming in.
We have more for you now on a developing story in Fayette County, the deaths of a pro wrestler and his family. Fayetteville authorities say the bodies of Chris Benoit and his family were found this afternoon in their home.
Right now it's being investigated as a murder-suicide. However, until we get the crime lab reports, it's undetermined exactly what happened.
That's when all of this, you know, all of these details start coming out about it's not just him that's dead, it's Nancy, and then Daniel's dead as well. And then that's when it just started getting out of control.
The father killed his wife and son and then committed suicide. That's what's happened here. You didn't want to believe it. Can't believe it. Can't be true. But it was.
The evidence indicates that it was a particularly brutal and vicious murder. It was something that showed some sign of real rage. I'm Matthew Randazzo V, and I'm the author of Ring of Hell, the story of Chris Benoit and the fall of the pro wrestling industry. The weekend of the murders, on Friday, Chris Benoit had a barbecue out by the pool with Daniel. And then that Friday evening, it appears that there was some sort of altercation between Chris and Nancy, that Chris restrained Nancy with duct tape and then utilized a telephone cord to strangle her, and then placed a Bible next to her body. There were a number of beer cans and wine bottles around that indicate Chris may have been drinking. Next morning, on Saturday, Chris, we assume, gave his son Daniel Xanax and then murdered him in his room, being suffocated by his father. A Bible was then placed next to Daniel as well. After that, Chris made a phone call and let friends know that Daniel and Nancy were both suffering from a bad stomach virus, and then he had to take them to the hospital. That night, Chris went to bed with the bodies of his wife and child in the house. On Sunday, Benoit makes a couple searches on the internet that are chilling in retrospect. One for a story in the Bible about the prophet Elijah and the resurrection of a dead boy in the Old Testament. And then a search about the quickest and most painless way of breaking one's own neck. Chris then went down to his home gym with a half-drunken bottle of wine. He went to his lat pull-down machine, he took the bar off, he wrapped a towel around his neck, and he took the metal cord from the lat pull-down machine and put it around his neck. He adjusted the weights to 240 pounds, and then he released it. So it's a very bizarre scenario, it's a very bizarre weekend, and it doesn't leave a lot of answers.
He was just a guy, you know, like my friend. Nobody expects their friend to kill their family, like what?
When I found out what had really happened, the shock is just, you can't even believe it. He had put his knee in her back and essentially broke her back. I couldn't fathom how cruel and how much pain she must have gone through and how horrific that must have been for her. It was just unfathomable.
If Chris did give Daniel that, you know, medication or prescription pills and suffocate him, you know, like, shame on him. Daniel was innocent in all this.
We were hearing other things come out about the circumstances of him putting the Bibles by their sides and having a knife that he had planted underneath Daniel's bed or something like that.
Still couldn't wrap my head around it. It just sounded so like some bad horror movie.
And now I'm a part of humanizing murderer. Strange.
I mean, to think that Nancy was dead for 2 days before Chris took his life, how is that even logical for this man who loved her so much?
Later, it turned out that there was a Bible in the house, similar to the ones left by Nancy and Daniel's body, that Chris had left something akin to a suicide note. Something along the lines of, I'm preparing to leave this earth. So Chris did leave a suicide note. He did know what he was doing. He was at least enough in his right mind to understand exactly what was happening, and was still considering whether he would go make a flight to go wrestle that night on international television.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
We came up on air with Vince talking and kind of letting everybody know what happened.
Last night on Monday Night Raw, the WWE presented a special tribute show, recognizing the career of Chris Benoit. However, now some 26 hours later, the facts of this horrific tragedy are now apparent. Therefore, other than my comments, there will be no mention of Mr. Benoit's name tonight.
It was understood that we were not to speak of Chris, speak of Benoit, speak of anyone of that incident. And by that next week, Chris's name was erased from everything that was involved with WWE. I mean, when we did interviews, we were not to mention Chris Benoit. So that's something that was really hard for us to do, but because we all wanted our jobs, it was understood.
I know WWE has kind of like erased his history of being in the business, and I can understand and totally agree with what they did. We're not going to praise a guy who murdered his wife or his son, or give him any accolades for that.
I went to the funeral of Nancy and Daniel. I can't even believe how sad that was. I was the WWE representative there, just me. It was the shits. To go to a funeral and people crying and a kid being buried and a woman being married for no reason. No reason to die.
The WWE sent JR, and I lost my cool with him and told him to his face that he wasn't welcome at the wake afterward. It was all a work, just fake, garbage, nonsense. I can see a work coming a mile away, and that's what I saw, and I knew that that was the truth.
I felt like I was the most unwanted person in the building because I was a WWE guy, and I probably loved him as much as anybody there.
Everybody was just a mess. It's shitty, and it's sad, and it's unfair because there's two people that could still be with us today. And if Chris wanted to take his life, then so be it. But to take all of them, I didn't go to Chris's funeral. I was angry. At that point, I was pretty angry at Chris, you know, for what he did.
His funeral, it was very private. We didn't tell anyone about it. That's when it all hit me right there, all at once. I was crying my eyes out.
Who in the wrestling business provided care for you and your family in the aftermath of this?
Is that a serious question? Not a single person. No one.
And did anyone from the WWE ever reach out to you and your family?
Chris Jericho and Chavo Guerrero. That's it. Nobody else. You know? Screw them. They weren't there for me. You know? They backed off like I didn't even exist. It was so hard after the funeral because the media was just nonstop, 24/7.
Tonight, we are talking about the strange and very sad case of Chris Benoit.
I didn't even watch the news anymore. I didn't even watch TV for months. I couldn't even watch wrestling anymore.
We're also told by the police here that there were instruments of death found, not instruments of murder. There's going to be an autopsy report, but there's an awful lot of confusion about how this happened.
It really, really was the darkest time of my life.
Benoit had an intense on-stage persona. He was nicknamed the Rabid Wolverine, the Canadian Crippler. The couple actually met when her former husband drew up a script that had put the two of them in a relationship.
It made everything extremely difficult. It made everything under a magnifying glass because CNN and Fox and all the news channels were at the gates. You know, a double murder suicide with a 7-year-old kid is news. But I think that there's a point where you really just need to let the family grieve. All I really wanted to do was to be with my niece and nephew.
The mainstream media's reaction was typical because, A, they love a tragedy, and it gives them another reason to take a shot at wrestling. It was a field day for them.
Professional wrestlers are 20 times more likely to die before age 45 than professional football players.
I think a lot of mainstream media looks down on wrestling as it is, and that suddenly it was public enemy number one.
Chris Benoit's diary is revealing new information about his state of mind. The wrestler wrote a series of letters to his best friend. At one point, Benoit wrote, "I'll be with you soon."
Mike Benoit believes it's the diary of his son going mad.
We just didn't understand this was going on at that time in Chris's life.
I got a call from Chris's dad, Mike Benoit, because he knew my relationship with Chris. The first thing he asked me was why, which from a father's standpoint, I can understand how upset he was. And unfortunately, and I felt bad, I didn't have any answers for him.
People need to understand that that was not him. Not the person we knew. The person I loved with all my heart, my hero.
The term that's been being thrown around everywhere is roid rage. Some say steroid abuse is rampant at the organization, and everyone just turns a blind eye to this.
The media's initial response to the Benoit tragedy was that this was a roid rage incident.
Where do steroids stand in the bizarre Benoit deaths?
Pro wrestling, when Chris Benoit entered it in the 1980s, was extremely discriminatory against people who were not 6 foot plus tall, who were not 250 pounds or more, and very, very muscular. My understanding is that Chris Benoit was using steroids from when he was in high school. In the months before the murders, Chris received a number of text messages from Nancy in which she made it very clear she was sick and tired of his steroid abuse. Nancy definitely directly accused him of abusing steroids to the point that it led him to be an angry and violent and unhappy husband. And she said that the WWE's drug enforcement policy and testing regime was obviously nonsense. Something called the Wellness Program that alleged that it was testing every WWE wrestler to make sure they weren't using recreational drugs, performance-enhancing drugs, or steroids.
I think at that time, you know, instituting a wellness program like that, I think everybody was happy that finally some of these guys that needed the help were going to get help. I thought it was a great idea, anything to help talent, save guys from themselves.
After Eddie died, the WWE's drug testing was super strict. It went through the roof. Like, you couldn't even take a freaking aspirin, like a high-powered aspirin, unless you had like a prescription. And I'm not kidding. The drug testing is so strict that this rampant steroid use, dude, you can't. You can't go snort cocaine or smoke weed or anything.
In practice, it was seen that this initial version of the wellness program had large loopholes in it and large blind spots that allowed wrestlers to continue to use drugs at a really large scale without tripping the tests.
Speculation is running wild. Did steroids play a role, or is there another explanation? We have an exclusive interview with WWE Chairman Vince McMahon.
WWE did everything they could to combat any coverage in the news media that indicated that drug abuse or steroid abuse was the cause of the homicides.
And obviously this is not an act of rage, it's an act of deliberation. When you do something like this over 3 days, it's not an act of rage, be it steroid rage or roid rage, whatever it's called, or any other rage.
WWE strongly suggests that it is entirely wrong for speculators to suggest that steroids had anything to do with these senseless acts.
It's all speculation until the toxicology reports come back.
In his autopsy, Chris Benoit was shown to have enormous amounts of testosterone in his body. Testosterone is still a steroid that's banned in all major sports. It directly leads to increased muscle growth. Some folks have said he had 10 times the normal amount of testosterone in his body as a normal human.
And did Benoit pass the wellness program check leading up to the murders?
Yes, preposterously, Chris Benoit passed the wellness checks leading up to the murder, despite the irrefutable fact that he was taking enormous amounts of steroids.
Well, after it initially happened, I actually had nightmares. It was very traumatic because as a female, I tend to really get angry with him. The one person she thought was there to protect her is the one that really took her life.
There was a lot of stuff going on behind closed doors that no one knew about. I think there's a lot of volatile fights. One thing I'd always heard about Nancy and the fact that she didn't take shit. So I just know there's a lot of volatility there. That's the word I think was used, volatile.
There was a few times that Nancy would call me and she would say that her and Chris are fighting. There was an instance when they were in Tampa And Chris was upset when they were driving on the way to our house, and Chris went in and busted the windshield of their car.
Did you ever witness any abuse that was going on in that relationship?
My sister called me to the house, and she called Mike Durham, known as Johnny Grunge, who was also a professional wrestler that lived in the area. And Mike said, I'll go wrangle Chris. I'll go wrangle Chris. Don't do anything rash. But it was already kind of done. He hurt her. I don't know whether it was intentional or accidental, but he hurt her. Out of respect for the kids that he still has here, I won't go further into that. She got a restraining order against him. I went down there and stayed at the house. Mike had him at a hotel there in the area. Chris contacted me directly because Nancy wasn't answering any of his calls and asked me to talk to my sister on his behalf. And please, please, please let him come to the house and talk to her personally. She called him, and he came over the next day, and they were back together a couple of days later. So I look back on that moment and say, you probably shouldn't have gotten involved, and why did I take his call? Because maybe that would have been the end of it. Almost every day I think about that.
When police found steroids on the scene, many assume that explained it. The killer had flipped out because of drug use. Or might there be another explanation?
The initial media coverage all focused on steroid use, and I said, there's no way. I'm Chris Nowinski. I'm a former WWE superstar, and now I am a neuroscientist and run the Concussion Legacy Foundation. My wrestling career came to an end because I had a series of concussions that I didn't quite appreciate were concussions. I never stopped performing until the damage was sort of too much. So I decided I would start digging into what else was known, and it became a book. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, is a progressive degenerative brain disease that appears to be started by hits to the head. What I knew about CTE at that time was that there were 4 cases of NFL players. 2 had died by suicide, and 1 had started hearing voices and led the police on a chase through upstate New York and died in a fiery crash going on the wrong side of the highway. When I heard about what happened with Chris Benoit, I immediately remembered a conversation I'd had with him maybe 6 months prior. I remembered that he had sat next to me in the locker room, and he said, I heard you writing a book about concussions. I was like, yeah. And he goes, I'm interested in what you're learning. And he's like, how many concussions have you had, before you had to retire? And I said, well, I can remember at least 6, but I probably had more. And I said, how many have you had? And he said, I've had more than I can count. And then he said, I'm gonna give you my phone number and I want you to call me next week. The next week I called him. It sounded like he was in the middle of an argument. He was clearly agitated. It sounded like someone else was there. He just said, hey, I can't talk right now. Can I call you back? And I said, sure. I wonder if the reason he was asking me to call him was that he knew that something was going on, but he didn't quite appreciate what that was. And so I decided that I really needed to know if Chris had CTE. There was so much media attention, I really couldn't imagine his family answering the phone. But I said, I'll give it a try. And Chris's father answered on the second ring. He was in a state of mind you could imagine when you just lost your son and learned what happened. I told him my theory, and he immediately said, yeah, I want to see this done. We have the brain in early July, and I think within about a month we knew that it was positive for CTE, and it was a pretty severe case of CTE. And so we held a press conference in New York.
When you look at Christopher Benoit's brain, it is in fact shocking. Our findings showed extensive areas of tau protein deposition throughout his brain. Tau protein is a marker for brain damage.
With Chris, he actually had what would be defined as a severe case of CTE at 40 years old, which is early to have it. So it wouldn't just be areas of his cortex or areas of his brain stem, but there was damage in areas that you would think could influence emotional behaviors. And I believe the degeneration of his brain changed who he was and what he was capable of. If you get hit in the head thousands of times, your brain essentially can start to rot. You get this damage in your brain that even after you stop getting hit in the head will continue to spread and changes who you are and how you behave and what you become.
I think about, when me and Chris would be talking and he would just be crying so much that, I wonder why he couldn't control his crying. Does that go with the concussions? Does that go with his brain? Eddie and Chris took a lot of chair shots. And these chair shots from years ago were hard and they were mean.
In the 90s, we used to take chair shots to the head. That was a badge of honor. And what I mean by that is someone would swing a steel chair at your head. And I literally remember you would grit your teeth and you'd tense yourself and tense your neck. And just take it. They hit you on the head with it and you just take it. That was what you did. That was expected. If you had a concussion in wrestling, you just shake it off. Shake it off, go in there and do it. And all of us did it.
I wrestled for 20 plus years. It makes me wonder, how much CTE do I have? How much CTE do these other wrestlers have? Because we all got it to some extent, Is this gonna be my end?
So one of the most incredible things to me is you have Harley Race invents the flying headbutt and tells everyone after it, don't do this move, it fucks your spine up horribly, it ruins your ability to have an old age. Dynamite Kid hears that from Harley Race, does it his whole career, ends up in a wheelchair. Dynamite Kid tells Chris Benoit does it his whole career, then loses his mind. I mean, there is a clear history of people repeating the most self-destructive story imaginable over and over again.
I think the Benoit tragedy led to some institutional changes. The awareness of what CTE is was never before even a conversation point. Now it is. And finally, unprotected chair shots and subsequent concussions are now being addressed because the one thing we've got to do is protect the athlete.
I think when you look at what Chris Benoit did as a symptom of some sort of medical problem, whether it's drug use or brain damage, I think that misses the point. Ultimately, this thing that is the core reason this happened was Chris Benoit made a decision when he was a very young person to do absolutely whatever it took to succeed at his childhood dream of becoming a pro wrestling star. No matter what happened that weekend, Chris Benoit's story was going to have a tragic end.
I think his fate was sealed the day that Eddie died, whether he knew it or not. I don't think anybody could save him after that. Not his kids, not his family, not his other friends. I just think that was the one guy that he said, I can't do it if Eddie's not with me. Whatever it was that he was going through, I think he just continued to shrink his whole world until all that was left was just whatever was in his head that caused him to snap. And he snapped.
It's not one thing. I think that it's a factor of alcohol and drugs and yes, possibly CTE and stress that he couldn't get off.
Chris was always gonna be my friend and my brother. I just know that there was something going on with him that wasn't him. And it's something that, I'm still very much torn with because you love Chris. You just hate what he did.
The act of what he did is unthinkable, unforgivable. But it's still hard for me to separate a friendship that I had with him, matches that I had with him, moments, times, car rides. I think I can always look at Chris as one of the best performers our business has ever seen. Just gotta leave it at that.
I get a question all the time, does Chris Benoit deserve to be in the Hall of Fame? And I'd say absolutely not. No. The issue is that if Chris were here, we could talk to him, he would say, putting me in the Hall of Fame is going to be one of the great distractions of the entire event. Because all it's going to do is bring up Nancy and Daniel and Chris in their last 24 hours. So therefore I say, Chris Benoit does not belong in the WWE Hall of Fame, now or ever.
You have two guys that were the same basically their whole life and had the same reputation of being just immaculate professionals, immaculate human beings, the nicest guys, and they both die very young, and one's legacy is acclaimed and one's is buried so that you almost can't say his name. If you would have told Chris, you know, when you die, your name and your body of work is gonna be erased from existence forever, it would have broke his heart. Because I think if nothing else, I remember he told me once, like, listen, the critics are the critics, but if you have the respect of your peers, then nothing else matters. So to find out that he would have lost the respect, not only of his peers, his friends, his family, I don't think he ever wanted that. It almost took down the whole business. What Chris did almost, and that's another thing, what Chris did almost destroyed the only thing that he ever loved from a professional standpoint. The only thing he ever loved, pro wrestling, Chris Benoit almost destroyed it. That would have torn him apart as well. So it leads us around to, like, why did he do it? And I don't think anyone's ever going to be able to answer that question.
You know, people would look at me different now because of what he did. People talking shit behind my back, looking at me different, getting bullied. Screw it. I'm defending my family and what I believe in. You know, he loved them. That definitely was not him. He's still my hero. I think about him all the time. I want them to recognize Nancy, though. She definitely deserves the recognition that she doesn't get.
That's the unfortunate and the sad part about the story, is that she needs to be remembered for a strong woman pioneering in this business and her talent, and focus on that instead of what happened to her.
She's a Hall of Famer all across the board, in my opinion. She was a pioneer and one of the best at a role that doesn't exist anymore. As a pro wrestling manager, she created the role, she perfected the role, and then when she stopped doing it, the role basically disappeared. I would like nothing better than to see Nancy, Nancy Benoit. Once again, you can't even say that name, right? Woman. I would like nothing better than to see woman be put into the WWE Hall of Fame.
She was a great mom. She was a beautiful friend, and Nancy will always be the superstar that she was meant to be in my mind.
Can I blow a kiss?
What do you remember the most about Nancy?
I remember everything about her. I remember how her hair smells. She used to tuck me in with both hands real hard, like under both sides of the blanket to tuck me in, almost like she was putting a lock on me to keep me safe. And to this day, when I get sad or upset or stressed out, I will tuck myself in on the sides so that I feel more secure.
What do you remember the most about Daniel?
Everything. I closed my eyes and I could see him doing everything. He was our whole lives, all of us. He was very, 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 very loved by our family, by his siblings. He and his brother were just thick as thieves.
Did you go on to have any relationship with the Benoit family afterward?
I tried. Unsuccessfully. I was told, I won't say by who, that the children didn't want anything to do with us. And apparently the children were told that we didn't want anything to do with them because of what their dad did, which was absolutely not the truth.
My last trip with my family was for WrestleMania 23 in Detroit. And then after the match, we flew back to Atlanta, me, Nancy, and Daniel. My dad went to Mexico for a tour. And then me, Nancy, and Daniel were just hanging around the house, taking pictures, you know, out by the trees with the dogs. And then, you know,
Yeah. That's what this is all about, bud. Killing shit. David is absolutely a victim. He's a great kid that was just dealt a bad hand. And it's just not fair. It's not right. He didn't do anything wrong. He's an innocent bystander in all of this.
It's good for us. It's good for us.
I felt that because Chris killed his family, that the family he left behind was automatically blackballed from the world. Like, they're gonna be blamed for what Chris did. To me, those two needed to be reconnected, because talking with David and meeting Sandra and knowing she was having the same issues and pain and hurt that David had, and nobody will ever really understand what they went through with the exception of each other. So I thought if I could connect them, if they had a chance to talk, that maybe they could move on and still realize that they have family in each other.
Chris Jericho, wrestling angel come to life. He gave my number to my nephew and gave my nephew's number to me. We hadn't talked since before everything happened.
So 13 years the last time we saw each other. It's been a very long time. She finally called me. I answered. We talked on the phone for probably a good 2 hours. And now going to watch wrestling because I still love it. It's in my blood. Feels like we never were apart. Felt like we just reconnected. Left off where we started. Nothing has changed. She's still my Auntie Zaja.
Chris lives on in David every day, and Nancy lives on in Sandra every day. And I think they were both lost when Chris and Nancy died. So hopefully this will help them get found.
We feel better.
Yeah.
Weight's been lifted off.
Because you guys have the same perspective, you know, and it's
I think
important for you
more
guys
than
to
anyone else,
stick
yeah.
together on this, right? Because you know, yeah, like we can be friends and be supportive, but it's not the same. It's for you guys.
No, it's not the same. It's family.
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
I've never been more grateful and happy to see someone that I love as I was when I saw my nephew.
Do you think you will ever be able to or want to give forgiveness towards Chris?
Yes, I think I do someday want to be able to forgive him. I do. Because carrying around the burden of hate gets exhausting. Everyone deserves forgiveness. And everyone deserves mercy. So I think that within time, there will be a day when I get on my knees and I finally say it, that I forgive him. You never know, it might be tomorrow, but I do know it's not today.
Typically flowed with predictable, comforting rhythm, a reassuring constancy that residents cherished. People drove home from their various commitments, often leaving the bustling anxieties of big city life firmly in their rear-view mirrors, exchanging the steel and concrete for the quiet constellations that emerged in the wide, open Virginian sky. Spotsylvania was, by its deep-seated reputation and the lived experience of its inhabitants, a very quiet, immensely safe place to reside, to lay down generational roots, and to raise a family, nurturing children in an environment of relative peace and security. And it was precisely this deeply ingrained, profoundly valued sense of communal security that would serve to amplify the terror of what was to come, making the impending event a devastating, chilling rupture in the peaceful fabric of May 18th, 2014. The hands of the clock were steadily approaching 11:30 that fateful evening when the initial, seemingly innocuous sounding alert broke through the customary calm. It was not a distress call, Not yet. It was, rather, a seemingly routine welfare check request, originating from concerned co-workers of a Spotsylvania woman named Lynn Mercer. Lynn, a highly dedicated registered nurse whose shifts often demanded both emotional fortitude and physical stamina, was scheduled to work at a hospital in Washington, District of Columbia, that night. However, as the hours advanced and her designated shift began, she had failed to appear. Such an absence was profoundly, startlingly uncharacteristic for Lynn. Her colleagues, intimately familiar with her impeccable work ethic, her unwavering sense of professional responsibility, and her meticulous punctuality, knew instinctively that for Lynn to miss a shift, let alone fail to call in to explain her absence or tardiness, signaled something gravely amiss, something far beyond a mere scheduling oversight or minor inconvenience. Their collective concern, rooted in years of shared professional camaraderie, mutual respect, and an almost familial understanding of Lynn's reliability, prompted them to reach out to the Spotsylvania Sheriff's Office. Their simple, heartfelt desire was merely to ensure that Lynn was well, to confirm her safety. The department, receiving the unusual call, quickly dispatched a deputy to Lynn's residential address. Her home was situated on the western, more rural end of the county, nestled comfortably away from the bustling, often chaotic Interstate 95 corridor, a thoroughfare frequently synonymous with ceaseless motion and burgeoning urban sprawl. Here, the immediate landscape transitioned from suburban development, gradually giving way to rolling farmland, punctuated by picturesque horse and cattle farms, a quintessential, serene Virginian rural idyll, rich with the sense of hay and the sounds of country living. This particular residence, further emphasizing seclusion and privacy, lay approximately a quarter of a mile off the main hard road, that is, a paved public thoroughfare, accessible only via a winding, unpaved gravel path. The area was, in every sense of the descriptive word, remote, with neighbors spaced comfortably, perhaps even generously, hundreds of yards apart. This meant fewer casual observations, fewer impromptu check-ins, creating an environment where a silent, internal tragedy could potentially unfold largely unnoticed by the outside world, masked by the very peace its residents sought. The deputy's patrol vehicle, a dark silhouette against the deepening night, crunched softly to a halt in the Mercer driveway. The presence of Lynn's car was immediately noted, sitting parked as expected, a seemingly reassuring detail. Perhaps, the deputy mused, the 60-year-old nurse was merely enjoying a well-deserved deep sleep, blissfully unaware of her co-workers' fretful calls and the unsettling implications of her absence. Yet, the exterior of the house itself offered no immediate comfort, no outward sign of active life. A profound shroud of darkness enveloped the residence. No lights illuminated the windows, casting the entire structure in an almost sepulchral gloom, an unnerving stillness that contradicted the expected warmth of a family home. The deputy approached the front door, his heavy-duty flashlight cutting a beam through the inky blackness. The quiet of the rural night broken only by the chirping of crickets, the rustle of leaves and a faint breeze, and the faint, rhythmic pulse of his own growing apprehension. He rapped firmly on the door, then again, his knuckles making solid contact with the sturdy wood. Silence was his only reply, save for the distinct, though muffled, sound of dogs barking from within, their agitated cries echoing the growing tension. There was no other movement, no flick of a light switch, no creak of footsteps responding to a summons, no familiar sound of a roused homeowner. A distinct chill began to settle in the night air, mirroring the growing unease, the prickling sense of wrongness in the deputy's chest. After knocking once more, a final, hopeful attempt to elicit a response from within the silent dwelling, the deputy made a critical decision, one born of established protocol and an ever-intensifying concern for the absent homeowners' well-being. He reached for the doorknob. His gloved fingers closed around the cold metal, turned it, and with a gentle push, the door yielded. It opened inward, silently, without any resistance, into the inky blackness that lay beyond, revealing only a deeper void. But the vast expanse of training, the countless hours of rigorous preparation, the grim scenarios rehearsed and analyzed in drills, could not fully, truly prepare the deputy for the scene that now awaited him. The stark reality of what lay beyond that unlocked door, illuminated now by the powerful beam of his flashlight, transcended anything he had previously encountered. For just inside the threshold, in the silent, darkened living room, tragically deprived of the warm light it once held, lay Lynn Mercer. It was immediately, horrifically clear. There was no doubt she had been shot. The visible trauma to her body was stark, sickening in its immediate impact. At least 2 crimson-stained areas marred her chest, silent, ghastly testaments to a violent and sudden end. The immediate scene offered no evidence of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no signs of a desperate fight for survival, no shattered glass, no disturbed objects. It appeared chillingly, as though she had been utterly ambushed, a sudden, brutal assault from which she had no conceivable chance to defend herself, caught utterly unaware. One might even describe the act with a more precise, more chilling term. An assassination, a cold, premeditated strike against a vulnerable, unsuspecting target. There were no signs of life, no faint pulse, no flicker of breath, only the terrible, profound stillness that irrevocably follows such an act of ultimate violence. The shooting left Lynn's quiet suburban community, and indeed all who heard of it, utterly terrified. A profound sense of vulnerability, an unwelcome guest, had entered their formerly peaceful enclave. The questions hung heavy in the air, echoing the collective disbelief, the shattering of their cherished illusions of safety. You have a, middle-class white woman dead at her home. What happened? This wasn't the kind of tragedy that historically visited Spotsylvania County. Such brutal acts, such anonymous violence, belonged to the grim reports emanating from big cities to distant, impersonal news cycles. But now it was here within their cherished, peaceful confines, brutally asserting itself. The community wrestled with a multitude of agonizing questions, grappling with a profound sense of existential vulnerability this act had inflicted upon their collective psyche. Was it a random crime, a senseless act of violence perpetrated by an unknown, opportunistic intruder, one that threatened the security of everyone in their homes? Or, far more sinister, far more psychologically devastating, was there an evil presence lurking not in the external shadows of the rural night, but within the very intricate, familial fabric of Lynn's own, seemingly loving family? The answer, as the layers of this tragic story began, slowly and painstakingly, to peel away, would prove far more unsettling, far more devastatingly personal, than any random act of violence could ever suggest. The truth, as it is wont to do, promised to be both chilling and deeply human. Chapter 2, The Mercers, A Family's Tapestry, A Daughter's Unraveling. Lynn Mercer was a true matriarch, a proud and loving mother of 6 children, each individual life a unique thread adding richness, complexity, and distinct pattern to her family's vibrant and expanding tapestry. The 2 eldest children, Melissa and her brother, sprang from Lynn's first marriage, their early formative years intrinsically shaped by the distinct and powerful memory of their mother. As a single, resilient parent, Melissa herself recounted the profound impact of this period, stating with clarity, "She and my father were divorced when I was young, so most of my early memories are of Mom being single." This early experience of independent strength and unwavering self-reliance undoubtedly contributed significantly to Lynn's later resilient spirit and her deep, unshakable commitment to her children, instilling in her capacity for navigating life's challenges with quiet fortitude. It was during these bustling yet formative years of single parenthood that Lynn encountered Bob Mercer. Their meeting was sparked by the amiable, relaxed backdrop of a dinner party hosted by mutual friends, an easy social setting. Bob's initial impression of Lynn was immediate powerful, and unequivocally positive. I thought she was very attractive, he recounted with a fond smile, an observation that quickly blossomed from casual conversation into a burgeoning, deeply felt romance. Their connection solidified, deepened, and before long, in a gesture signaling the growing seriousness of their relationship, Lynn brought him home to meet her 2 young children. Their acceptance was swift and enthusiastic, a clear affirmation of Bob's gentle nature and Lynn's good judgment. We really liked him, and so we were very happy that Mom got married. Melissa remembered, her words reflecting the childlike joy and relief at witnessing their mother find new happiness and companionship. This blending of families, a beautiful merging of distinct pasts into a shared future, marked a new chapter, one filled with the promise of expanded horizons, mutual support, and profound domestic harmony. Together, Lynn and Bob would go on to welcome 4 more children into the world, cementing their union and enlarging the lively, dynamic Mercer household into a truly robust family. Yet, Bob's chosen path, a noble and disciplined career in the military, inevitably introduced periods of geographical separation and emotional strain, echoing Lynn's earlier experiences of raising children with a robust degree of independence and self-sufficiency. We got married, and 3 days later, I deployed to Turkey for a year, Bob recalled, painting a stark, concise picture of a commitment to country that often meant prolonged absence from his growing family. His deployments were a recurring theme throughout the initial years of their marriage, a consistent rhythm spanning 6 demanding years, punctuating the domestic landscape with both moments of joyous reunion and the undeniable challenges of a military family's existence. One such significant year in this cycle of service and homecoming was 1988, a year that held particular significance as the birth year of Elena. Her arrival at the venerable Walter Reed Hospital, precisely 9 months to the day after Bob's return from one such deployment, was a tender, eagerly anticipated moment, a new life unfolding beautifully within the larger, often complex, rhythm of military service and profound familial homecoming. Soon after, however, a welcome shift occurred in Bob's military career trajectory, a promotion to a desk job. This change provided a much-needed, stable anchor for the family, allowing them to finally settle in suburban District of Columbia. They eventually made their lasting home in Fredericksburg, Virginia, where Elena spent the significant majority of her formative childhood years. We moved to Fredericksburg, Virginia, and she spent the majority of her childhood in that house, cementing that particular residence as a hub of childhood memories and familial activity. It was indeed a bustling, lively abode, a crowded house in the best sense of the word, particularly so after the birth of Elise, the youngest of the 6 siblings, a mere 2.5 years after Elena, further expanding the vibrant chaos and affectionate warmth of the household. We always had a lot of family, Melissa affirmed, conjuring an evocative image of shared laughter, inevitable squabbles, boisterous holidays, and unique, indelible camaraderie that only a large, close-knit family can cultivate. Elena and Melissa's bond, reinforced not just by kinship, but by the simple, enduring intimacy of sharing a bedroom for almost half their lives, transcended mere sisterhood. It evolved into a foundational childhood friendship, a constant companionship that weathered the everyday joys and frustrations of growing up. As small children, we were pretty close, Melissa recalled, a statement hinting at a youthful intimacy that would, tragically and profoundly, be tested to its absolute breaking point in later years. Indeed, the entire family was closely intertwined, a collective unit strengthened and fortified, perhaps ironically, by Lynn's ambitious and arduous pursuit of her nursing degree. During this period, with Lynn dedicating herself to both academic study and familial obligations, the older children naturally assumed greater responsibilities around the house. A common and often character-building dynamic in families where a parent juggles education with the demands of domestic life. We had to help out a lot and take the kids on walks. We would do things. They'd do their hair. My brother and I would play games with them, etc., Melissa summarized, reflecting a childhood richly punctuated by both collaborative caregiving and genuine companionship. It was, as she succinctly put it, just part of being the oldest kids, a natural, accepted role within their loving ecosystem, fawned over and cherished by her older siblings, who doted upon her with genuine affection. Elena blossomed into a beautiful little girl, embodying an almost ethereal innocence. She had that face of an angel, a family member reminisced, conjuring an image of cherubic charm. She was a very funny and sweet and adorable little girl. Her appeal wasn't merely superficial. Elena possessed a vibrant, expressive inner world, one that manifests itself beautifully through various artistic talents. Elena was, I'd say, gifted in terms of some of the arts. It was noted. She sang very, very well. She played the piano. She loved to dance. Ballet, in particular, became a prominent and joyful expression within the Mercer household, her graceful movements filling their home with an artistic energy. This array of natural gifts and nurtured talents, however, was accompanied by a burgeoning, increasingly pronounced desire that would soon define much of Elena's early emotional landscape, a deep, almost insatiable craving for an audience, for validation, for the spotlight. Early on, Lynn, with her preternaturally keen observational skills honed by both her professional training as a nurse and her vast experience as a mother of many, detected a distinct and increasingly defining quality in Elena. She noticed that Elena seeked more attention than the other children and tried to be sent over. Attention, this early indication of Elena's pronounced, almost desperate need for spotlight, soon translated into a persistent pattern of intense rivalry within the household, particularly with her siblings. We were always in competition with each other, Melissa explained, her voice tinged with the memory of incessant contest. It was always a competition. Who could be better? This competitive drive, fueled by Elena's profound need for affirmation, manifested across various spheres of their shared childhood experiences. With piano, it was who could be better, who could win more awards. With ballet, it was who would do how many pirouettes. Melissa summarized it succinctly and powerfully as just a constant battle between us for the attention. But for Elena, there was one person's attention that truly mattered above all others. One source of validation she craved with an almost singular, all-consuming intensity. Her mother's. Elena had to have Mom's complete and total absolute attention. It was revealed, and disturbingly, consistently, she usually got it. This isn't to say Lynn was overtly or foolishly indulgent, or that she deliberately favored Elena. Rather, it suggests that Elena possessed an uncanny ability, an almost instinctual talent for subtle, yet profoundly effective manipulation, particularly adept at tapping into her mother's boundless, self-sacrificing well of compassion and maternal instinct. She knew how to pull at my mother's heartstrings and then just make my mother bend at her every whim, an insight that painted a portrait of a mother utterly captivated by her child's manufactured needs. It was a talent that, far from being an innocent or fleeting childhood quirk, would tragically evolve into a powerful, insidious tool, one that Elena would learn to wield with devastating, ultimately destructive effect, particularly when she met 17-year-old Christina Brown in 2005, a meeting that would irrevocably alter the trajectory of all their lives. Chapter 3, The Tempestuous Alliance Takes Root. The year was 2005. Elena Mercer, then a spirited 17-year-old, found herself on the cusp of adulthood, navigating that often tumultuous, yet exhilarating, period typically characterized by intense self-discovery, burgeoning independence, and the formation of profound personal relationships. It was at this crucial juncture in her young life that she encountered Christina Brown, also 17 years of age, born just 2 weeks after Elena, in the bustling, often unforgiving heart of Washington, District of Columbia. While geographically, their childhoods were relatively proximate, the pathways of their early lives have been dramatically divergent, carving out a stark, almost irreconcilable contrast in their formative experiences. Elena's childhood, as meticulously described, had been a tapestry richly woven with threads of loving family, unwavering emotional and financial support, and the comforting, predictable rhythms of a deeply stable home environment. Christina's circumstances, however, had been far more fraught, characterized by a palpable lack of security, a gnawing absence of stability, and an overarching sense of transience. Chris had a kind of difficult upbringing, the narrative revealed with a quiet gravitas. The terse simplicity of that statement belied a world of struggle. She wasn't living in a stable home. Consequently, she was deprived of the fundamental, unwavering support system that most young girls are fortunate enough to experience as an immutable birthright, a foundational buffer against life's harsher realities. In fact, it was tragically clear that much of the formative support Christina received in her youth did not originate from familial warmth or consistent encouragement. Instead, it largely stemmed from the institutional structures designed to assist vulnerable youth. Christina had been placed in foster care on multiple occasions within the District of Columbia, a profoundly unsettling and often traumatizing experience that inevitably leaves indelible psychological marks on a young psyche, fostering a persistent sense of insecurity, a profound need for self-reliance, and, at times, a hardening, almost defiant resilience against an often hostile world. Despite these dramatically disparate backgrounds, one steeped in the comforting security of familial comfort and predictable rhythms, the other buffeted by the unpredictable uncertainties of the foster care system. The two teenagers found common ground, a powerful, magnetic bond formed between them, almost instantaneously transcending their contrasting origins and quickly deepening into something far more profound than mere friendship. Elena had fallen in love with Christina Brown, an intense, all-consuming attachment that would ultimately shape both their fates. This unexpected, deeply emotional development, Elena's fervent romantic relationship with Christina, took Elena's parents, and particularly her mother Lynn, by considerable surprise. While Elena had experienced flings with guys when she was 16, establishing that was the first boyfriend, and followed by a couple other ones who were very short-lived, this romantic connection with Christina represented a new, unfamiliar, and frankly, unexpected facet of her daughter's burgeoning identity. Lynn, a devout and deeply committed Catholic, initially grappled with this revelation. Her faith provided a framework of conventional morality and societal expectations. Yet her maternal love, vast and encompassing, ultimately prevailed over any internal conflict or judgment. She approached the situation not with a preconceived notion of judgment or moral condemnation, but with characteristic empathy and a profound sense of compassion, seeing Christina not as an anomaly or a threat, but as another young soul in apparent need of guidance and support. She was strict Catholic, but she thought she could help Christina, and she wanted to see Elena happy, so she was accepting. This succinct yet powerful statement eloquently captures Lynn's internal conflict, the delicate dance between her deeply held spiritual convictions and her overwhelming maternal instinct, and the ultimate triumph of pure, unconditional love over any potential societal or religious preconceptions. Her acceptance was not grudging or merely tolerant. It was an active, compassionate embrace, extended with genuine warmth and a desire for genuine well-being. In fact, Lynn's acceptance extended far, far beyond mere tolerance or even simple understanding. When Christina turned 18 years of age and subsequently aged out of foster care, a poignant and bureaucratic term signifying a moment a young person transitions from institutional support into the often harsh, unyielding realities of independent living, frequently without adequate preparation, Lynn, driven by her boundless nurturer's instinct, offered Christina a place within the physical and emotional sanctuary of the Mercer family home. She needed a safe and reliable home. Mom, being that nurturer, that caretaker, offered Christina a place to stay. It was an act of profound, unconditional kindness, a gesture that spoke volumes about Lynn's deeply ingrained character, offering not just ephemeral shelter, but a tangible sense of belonging, familial warmth, and stable security that Christina had likely yearned for her entire young, tumultuous life. It was, in essence, an extension of her own family to a young woman who had, by circumstance, been deprived of such fundamental security. Lynn's profound generosity, however, did not cease there. Indeed, it only expanded, echoing the boundless nature of her heart. Her magnanimous spirit compelled her to do more than simply provide a roof over Christina's head. She had such a big heart. She wanted to help her better herself. The account highlighted, listing a veritable litany of supports and kindnesses that spoke to Lynn's profound commitment to Christina's future, helping her through college, giving her a car to drive, helping her financially, letting her live in her house. These were not small favors. They were substantial, long-term investments in a young woman's future, offered without expectation of immediate repayment. Over the next few years, Christina was not merely a transient guest. She became an integrated, albeit complex, part of the Mercer household, actively taking classes at a local community college, all while being financially and emotionally supported entirely by Lynn's unwavering commitment and her open-hearted generosity. The Mercers, through Lynn's benevolence, essentially financed their very existence, providing them with their own bedroom and fully sustaining the young couple. A family member's astute observation. Lynn catered to Elena. She always was trying to make her happy, subtly underscore the dynamic. Elena's desires, often implicitly expressed through her relationship with Christina and Christina's needs, often drove Lynn's most significant and generous actions. However, even with her mother's encompassing acceptance and robust, selfless support, the relationship between Elena and Christina was far from placid or stable. It was characterized by an inherent, recurring tempestuousness, a recurring cycle of passionate reconciliation followed by acrimonious rupture. They would break up and come back and break up and come back, Melissa explained, indicating a volatile, unstable foundation prone to dramatic emotional swings. This on-again, off-again dynamic, a hallmark of their emotional volatility, seemed to finally culminate in a definitive public separation in 2010, prompting a fleeting return to old habits for Elena. They broke up, and Elena decided to go date guys again, an apparent return to previous patterns that suggested an underlying instability in her romantic attachments. This brief detour into heterosexual relationships led to a significant, life-altering development. Elena left Chris and basically stayed with the guy for 2 months until she was pregnant. The discovery of her pregnancy, however, did not lead Elena to a stable future with the baby's biological father. Instead, with a curious and deeply revealing emotional logic, it seemingly served as a potent catalyst for her to come rushing back to Christina, suggesting a profound, almost primal emotional dependency that transcended simple romantic love, speaking more to a comfort zone, a deeply entrenched, albeit problematic, pattern. The couple, now anticipating parenthood, yet again found themselves turning to Lynn for refuge. They moved back into Elena's parents' home, another poignant, heartbreaking testament to Lynn's unending readiness to provide shelter, solace, and unconditional support to her children, regardless of their choices or challenges. In November 2010, Elena gave birth to a daughter, an event that, despite the chaotic and complex circumstances of its conception, brought immense, unburdened delight to her mother. My mother was preparing and caring for this baby, and I think that's when my mother honestly was the happiest. A family member observed, highlighting profound joy Lynn derived from this new, innocent life. This innocent life, this new grandchild, became a focal point for Lynn's ceaseless nurturing spirit, bringing her a profound, if ultimately temporary, sense of pure, unadulterated happiness. But this period of domestic stability, momentarily bathed in the glow of a new baby and the quiet contentment of a doting grandmother, was, regrettably, fleeting. Elena, Christina, and the baby eventually sought their own semblance of independence, making the move out of supportive confines of the Mercer home and establishing a new residence. In neighboring King George County, they began, ostensibly, to construct a life for themselves, to create a veneer of normalcy and self-sufficiency. Christina, demonstrating a notable degree of responsibility and a nascent work ethic, secured employment, actively working 2 different jobs, one for a rental car agency and another a local hotel, contributing financially to their new household. And in 2012, the couple took another significant step in their journey towards what they hoped would be perceived as stability, formalizing their bond in a marriage ceremony held in the vibrant heart of the District of Columbia. Yet, even as Elena ostensibly settled down into a seemingly more stable existence with Christina, beneath the surface of their new life, darker currents were gathering force. A malevolent energy was coalescing, preparing to unleash a horrifying crime that would not only abruptly and violently take her mother's life, but would also, and with chilling irony, put her own daughter's future, the very child for whom this deadly drama ostensibly unfolded, in profound and agonizing jeopardy. The stage was irrevocably set for a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions, one that would brutally strip away the fragile veneer of normalcy they had so carefully constructed, exposing the sinister secrets, the toxic resentments, and the profound, deeply rooted dysfunctions that festered, unnoticed and unaddressed, within this troubled family dynamic for far too long. The coming revelations promise to be both shocking and deeply disturbing, a testament to the shadows that can consume even the most loving of families. Chapter 4. The Grisly Discovery and a Deluge of Harrowing Questions. Just before the stroke of midnight, on May 18th, 2014, the tranquil evening in Spotsylvania County, typically defined by the quiet hum of nocturnal life and the distant chorus of crickets, was irreversibly shattered. A sheriff's deputy, dispatched to the secluded Mercer residence for what was initially presumed to be a routine welfare check, a prosaic duty that too often precedes extraordinary findings, made a gruesome, horrifying discovery that would ignite a complex, deeply disturbing, and ultimately agonizing criminal investigation. Inside Lynn Mercer's otherwise ordinary home, the 60-year-old registered nurse lay dead, her vibrant life extinguished by an act of horrific, senseless violence. The succinct, yet chilling, official report conveyed the stark reality. We found a victim laying on the living room floor with no signs of life. She had been shot. These laconic words encapsulate the immediate, grim reality that confronted first responders, painting a scene of unexpected, brutal devastation within a private dwelling. The initial assessment of the crime scene, a somber canvas of tragedy, immediately painted a stark picture of calculated brutality. It appeared that Ms. Mercer had been ambushed, indicating a surprise attack, a swift and merciless act against an unsuspecting victim. The sequence of events, though yet to be fully confirmed by forensic detail, seemed chillingly clear in its apparent efficiency. The perpetrator stepped out and shot her down, and then stepped over and shot 2 more rounds into her upper torso. This clinical description suggested a merciless, almost ritualistic finishing blow, delivered with chilling deliberation as Lynn lay incapacitated and vulnerable, devoid of any capacity for defense. It was a cold, efficient execution rather than a desperate struggle. However, Lynn's lifeless body was not the sole source of profound disquiet or disturbing anomaly for the deputy and the rapidly assembling team of first responders and seasoned investigators. The very atmosphere of the front living room carried an additional, deeply unsettling detail. the poignant presence of children's toys scattered haphazardly around the space, innocent objects hinting at an absent, potentially vulnerable occupant. The front living room had child toys around. One of my first thoughts when I saw the kids' toys was, a child. The sudden, gut-wrenching realization that a child might be in imminent danger of fear every law enforcement. Officer Carey's sent an immediate, potent jolt of panic and adrenaline through the seasoned officers. The immediate, frantic search that ensued was fueled by a desperate, fervent hope that the child was merely hiding, perhaps traumatized but safe, not another silent casualty, another innocent victim of this senseless violence. Officers, abandoning all but the most critical forensic preservation, meticulously scoured every potential hiding place, closets, under the bed, anywhere a person could be, a methodical, urgent sweep of the entire residence. The search, driven by an almost frantic imperative, continued until a harrowing, yet ultimately reassuring, conclusion was reached. We went through the whole house like that until we were confident that the house was empty. A child, at least, had been spared the direct horror of this night. With the immediate threat to a child seemingly averted, the primary focus of the investigation pivoted, shifting to deciphering the precise nature of the crime itself. Was the child abducted? Or, equally plausibly, had Lynn's killers been after something else entirely? Their target not a life, but material possessions? The ransacked state of the house, a scene of disarray, offered a tantalizing, yet potentially misleading, clue. Jewelries were pulled out. Clothing was laying everywhere. It looked like somebody had gone through the house looking for something. This suggested a burglary, a home invasion that had tragically gone terribly wrong, transforming a property crime into a capital offense. The investigators, employing systematic procedure, began to construct a precise timeline of Lynn's recent activities. Lynn's work schedule at Washington Hospital Center was well known to both her family and her employer. She worked the same shifts out for years, typically concluding her overnight duties and arriving home in the mornings. Adding another layer of complexity and vulnerability, Lynn's husband, Bob Mercer, was not at home on the night of the murder. He was temporarily residing near his job just outside the District of Columbia in Alexandria, Virginia. Bob's absence was due to a practical medical necessity. Bob had just had back surgery, and he was living up north for convenience because he couldn't drive because of his back surgery. This detail meant Lynn was unequivocally alone in the large, secluded home, a fact potentially exploited by an opportunistic intruder who might have scouted the property and discerned her isolated vulnerability. The initial prevailing hypothesis began to solidify, constructing a plausible narrative of events. Lynn, returning home from work on a Saturday morning, perhaps a little tired after a long shift, may have inadvertently stumbled upon burglars who mistakenly believed the house to be entirely empty, her being found in her scrubs when discovered, with all her belongings around her, suggesting they had just fallen to the floor in a moment of surprise and terror, strongly bolstered this theory. She had walked directly into an ambush, a violent confrontation she was wholly unprepared for, her routine suddenly, fatally interrupted. The forensics, now being meticulously gathered and analyzed, painted a stark and uncompromising picture of the brutality inflicted. Lynn had been shot a total of 4 times. 2 of these grievous wounds were to her back. One bullet had passed through her back and came out her chest, while the other had gone through her lower torso and had passed through her legs. These initial shots, delivered from behind and indicating a sudden, unexpected attack, were likely intended to instantly incapacitate her, to spin her around with their impact and cause her to fall on her back on the floor, rendering her utterly helpless. The subsequent actions of the killer revealed a chilling depravity and a calculated intent to extinguish life. As Lynn lay bleeding and profoundly vulnerable on the floor, the perpetrator approached, deliberately firing 2 additional rounds into her upper torso, a final, cold-blooded act of execution, a merciless end. However, even amidst such clinical clarity of violence, subtle anomalies, small yet persistent inconsistencies began to surface, details that would ultimately challenge the initial, neat narrative of a simple burglary gone awry. Despite the forensic evidence of 4 distinct bullet wounds in Lynn's body, the investigators, conducting an exhaustive search, could only account for 3 shell casings at the immediate crime scene. We tore the house apart looking for that last case, and we weren't able to find it. This curious, perplexing discrepancy, a missing piece in a brutal puzzle, led to an educated and crucial inference, which made us believe that the gun had possibly jammed after the last shot. This detail, seemingly minor in the grand scheme of a murder investigation, would ultimately prove to be profoundly, exquisitely significant in later stages, serving as a unique identifier. Moreover, the physical characteristics of the retrieved shell casings were unusually, almost remarkably, distinctive. The shell casings were very specific. There were steel shell casings with red dots on the back. This was decidedly not standard, readily available ammunition, not the kind found in every local sporting goods store. A seasoned investigator, reflecting on his extensive career, noted the rarity. In my 30 years, I've never run across them before. This absolute specificity, this unique identifier, offered a potential forensic fingerprint, a direct and uncommon link that could ultimately tie a specific weapon, and by extension, its owner, directly to the heinous act. In addition to the unusual steel shell casings, the diligent investigators successfully recovered all 4 of the bullets used in the crime, each a silent, grim testament to the violence. 2 were found embedded within the immediate vicinity of the living room. 1 bullet had lodged in a couch, recovered intact, while a second bullet was found in a corner, having perhaps ricocheted or missed its primary target. And, grimly, the 2 bullets fired at close range, as the killer stood over Lynn, had passed cleanly through her body, ultimately lodging themselves within the very structure of the home. 1 bullet had lodged in a floor joist, and a crucial 4th bullet was found underneath the home on the ground, having pierced through the flooring entirely. Each piece of this intricate ballistics puzzle, the recovered casings, both standard and anomalous, and the spent bullets, each bearing the unique imprints of its journey, became an invaluable evidentiary component, capable of being analyzed and potentially matched to a specific murder weapon. The collected ballistics evidence from the scene was promptly and carefully sent for expert analysis at the State Crime Laboratory, the fervent hope being that it would unveil the definitive identity of the gun's wielder, removing the cloak of anonymity from Lynn's killer. Yet, a vexing and pervasive question lingered heavily in the air, a silent torment to the investigators, whose hand, imbued with such malevolent intent, had wielded such a weapon with such cold, clinical efficiency. The secluded nature of the property, Lynn's chosen sanctuary, had, in a cruel twist of irony, proven a double-edged sword for the investigating officers. This house was very secluded. The nearest house was a couple 100 yards away, most of the lots. There are large lots, several acres in size. This rural privacy, once a coveted luxury offering solitude and escape, now presented a significant and daunting investigative hurdle. The neighbors, those immediate sentinels of any unusual activity, those informal guardians of local peace, hadn't seen or heard anything. There were no eyewitnesses, no distant sounds of gunfire to break the quiet of the night, no strange vehicles reported. The profound silence of the rural evening, in this instance, protected the perpetrator. The neighbors who did know Lynn, however, spoke of her with universal adoration and deep affection. She was described as probably the perfect friend. Everybody loved her. A chorus of glowing testimonials affirming her character and positive impact on her community. This consistent portrait of a universally beloved benevolent figure made the incomprehensible brutality of her end all the more jarring. A stark and painful incongruity. However, as is often the case in the complex, layered landscape of criminal investigation, the first subtle cracks in an otherwise perfect facade often begin to show. Well, almost everyone, an experienced investigator intoned, implying a crucial caveat, a deliberate hesitation that suggested a nuance in her universally positive reputation. According to the same neighbors, those intimate observers of local dynamics, there were indeed two individuals with whom Lynn shared a strained, often tumultuous relationship, two names that surfaced almost immediately in hushed tones of suspicion and knowing glances. Elena Mercer, Lynn's own daughter, and Christina Brown, Elena's wife. The profound, unsettling reason for their immediate inclusion in this grim tapestry of suspicion stemmed directly from the very origins of Elena and Christina's unusual and ultimately tragic alliance, a story steeped in manipulation, defiance, and a disturbing sense of entitlement. Chapter 5, A Daughter's Volatile Temper, A Mother's Unending Struggle. Elena Mercer, as numerous recollections from her childhood and adolescence vividly revealed, had always been a complex and, to put it mildly, demanding individual, beneath the almost angelic visage of a beautiful little girl. Often admired for her talents and charm, lay a nascent volatility, a burgeoning emotional intensity that profoundly defied easy categorization or simple explanation. Elena was one she turned around for very volatile, very easy to anger, very vindictive, an astute observer noted, meticulously tracing a distinct and alarming shift from youthful sweetness to a more troubled, often hostile temperament. Her emotional outbursts, far from being the typical, fleeting tantrums of childhood, were severe, even frightening. They were explicitly described as violent temper tantrums, signaling a deeper, more insidious internal struggle, a profound disequilibrium within her young mind. Lynn and Bob, as any loving and deeply concerned parents would, immediately recognized the gravity and increasing severity of Elena's behavioral challenges. With immense dedication, they tirelessly sought professional help, a testament to their commitment to their daughter's well-being. Elena was promptly placed in therapy, an earnest, heartfelt attempt to navigate the turbulent, often bewildering currents within her young, troubled mind. However, instead of the hope for amelioration or calming of her intense emotions, her illness, tragically, appeared to worsen, deepening its insidious hold. Eventually, a team of dedicated specialists provided a definitive diagnosis that shed a painful, yet clarifying light on her struggles. They'd essentially diagnosed her as bipolar. This severe neurological condition, characterized by extreme, often debilitating mood swings that include periods of elevated emotional highs, mania or hypomania, and profound, debilitating lows, depression, eloquently explained the observed severe volatility and erratic emotional states. Her escalating condition necessitated increasingly intensive intervention, tragically leading to a distressing, recurrent cycle of institutionalization. She was in and out of psychiatric hospitals, a stark, painful reality that speaks volumes to profound and relentless challenges faced by both Elena in her personal torment and by her parents, who bore the immense emotional and logistical burden of her ongoing care. Over the subsequent several years, while Elena's father, Bob, worked tirelessly and with immense self-sacrifice to provide crucial financial stability for his struggling family, a commendable, unwavering act of paternal dedication, Elena's mother, Lynn, engaged in her own equally arduous, often emotionally draining battle. Her focus was singular, to support her daughter's grueling, lifelong struggle with bipolar disorder. She tried to get Elena the best care that she could, an effort that encompassed not just unwavering emotional support, but also navigating the bureaucratic labyrinth of complex healthcare systems, battling ceaselessly with insurance providers, She fought with insurance over and over and over to make sure that she could have stayed long enough to address the issues, highlighting the immense financial and emotional toll exacted upon Lynn in her relentless advocacy for her child. Her commitment to finding effective solutions was unceasing and truly remarkable. If one hospital proved ineffective or insufficient in its approach, she would proactively and aggressively fight to get her transferred to another hospital, demonstrating an unwavering, almost fierce, dedication to securing the absolute best possible care for her child's profound distress. It was in 2005, when Elena was a formative 17 years of age, that Lynn, in her continued and desperate quest for the most effective treatment, made the difficult decision to check her daughter into a special residential program explicitly, tailored for troubled teens, individuals grappling with significant behavioral and emotional challenges. Elena, during this particularly acute period, was experiencing a severe psychological episode, described with alarming specificity as a really bad fit, a crisis so intense and pervasive that it necessitated involuntary intervention, resulting in her being committed again, and it was precisely within the structured, often intense therapeutic environment of this mental health facility, a place of shared vulnerability and profound emotional challenges, that the pivotal and ultimately tragic connection between Elena and Christina Brown was forged. Elena and Chris had both suffered from mental illness and had both been institutionalized in a mental health facility, and that's where they met. This shared crucible of mental illness, this common, often isolating experience of grappling with internal demons within an institutional setting, served as the unexpected genesis of their complex, profoundly symbiotic, and ultimately destructive relationship, a shared vulnerability creating a powerful, perilous bond. Upon their eventual discharge from the facility, Lynn, with her ever-open heart and boundless capacity for compassion, extended her magnanimous generosity to Christina as well, welcoming Elena's girlfriend into the warmth and presumed safety of her home. Lynn's efforts to ensure Elena's happiness were legendary within the family, often overriding her own needs and concerns. Lynn tried everything she could to make that child happy, an observation that captured her singular, unwavering focus on her daughter's well-being and contentment. This immense and consistent effort naturally extended to Christina, who now found herself comfortably, and perhaps suspiciously, ensconced in the Mercer household, receiving the kind of stability, warmth, and foundational support she had tragically long been denied in her tumultuous youth. Lynn not only provided essential sustenance, food, but also meticulously paid the utilities, effectively subsidizing the entire existence of the two young women, creating a life of ease and freedom from financial responsibility that they had not earned. At this particular juncture, Elena was receiving crucial financial support in the form of disability, Social Security, acknowledging her documented mental health challenges. Concurrently, Christina had secured employment, working modestly at a local car wash. Combined, their incomes totaled approximately $1,800 a month. While this figure might not equate to vast wealth, a family member astutely observed that it was not bad for a couple that's living with no outside expenses, strongly suggesting a significant degree of financial ease and surplus due to Lynn's comprehensive, unflagging support. However, according to members of the deeply concerned family, this newfound financial flexibility and lack of external responsibility were, regrettably, quickly diverted towards increasingly illicit and destructive pursuits. They were doing copious amounts of drugs. They were using marijuana openly, a statement that denoted a blatant disregard for household rules, Lynn's authority, and a deepening, worrying descent into the insidious grip of substance abuse. The language further suggested a wider, more disturbing pattern. They were using other drugs as well, but not just milk and weed, hinting at a more extensive spectrum of illicit drug use, amplifying the growing and profound concerns within the family for both their welfare and the stability of the household. Disturbingly, their unbridled drug use persisted, indeed even intensified, after the birth of Elena's daughter, signaling a dangerous, almost defiant detachment from their most fundamental responsibilities as parents. A particularly harrowing and vivid incident occurred when the baby was around 6 months old. Melissa, Lynn's older daughter, recounted the traumatic experience of visiting Elena and Christina with her own 2 young children, only to be confronted by a pervasive, unmistakable, and profoundly offensive odor upon entering Elena and Christina's living space. I walk in, and the house just reeks of marijuana. I'm like, Mom, what the heck? Her question, bursting with a potent mix of dismay, alarm, and protective anger for the innocent child, was met with a weary, almost resigned response from Lynn. Mom was like, I've told them to stop. I can't. What am I supposed to do? Lynn's words conveyed a palpable sense of powerlessness, a defeatist acceptance of a situation that was clearly untenable. Melissa's natural, instinctive response, uttered with righteous indignation, was direct and clear. I was like, call the cops. It reflected a clear, unambiguous understanding of the imminent peril to the helpless infant. Yet Lynn, perpetually caught in the gravitational pull of Elena's deeply ingrained manipulation, hesitated. My sister honestly manipulated my mother and made her so fearful that she honestly probably felt like she had no choice. This stark, brutal assessment, delivered by a family member intimately familiar with the toxic dynamics, vividly revealed the extent of Elena's profound psychological hold over Lynn, painting a heart-wrenching portrait of a mother trapped in a vortex of fear, emotional blackmail, and overwhelming, guilt-laden maternal love. Furthermore, the family confided in the attentive investigators that Lynn's pervasive apprehension was not solely directed at Elena's volatile temper or unpredictable mood swings. Christina, too, carried a sinister shadow from a violent and allegedly criminal past, a history that added another layer of grave, existential concern for Lynn's safety and the long-term stability of her home. According to Elena's father, Bob, Christina had been a drug runner for a drug ring in Washington, District of Columbia, a shocking and profoundly unsettling revelation that undoubtedly added a new, terrifying dimension to Lynn's fears, solidifying her belief that she was navigating a truly perilous domestic situation. The volatile combination of Christina's overtly tough attitude, a demeanor cultivated from a hard life, and Elena's inherently volatile nature, characterized by unpredictable mood swings and a pervasive sense of entitlement, collectively subjected Lynn to an escalating, relentless campaign of intimidation. They were threatening her, telling her they were going to push her down the stairs. These were not idle, childish threats. They were increasingly aggressive, physically menacing pronouncements that spoke of malice and ill intent, escalating beyond mere emotional manipulation. Their threats just became increasingly more violent, indicating a dangerous, terrifying trajectory towards physical harm and outright domestic abuse. The simmering tension, the constant undercurrent of menace, finally boiled over in June of 2012, escalating to a critical, unavoidable point where law enforcement intervention became an absolute, desperate necessity. A big blow-up at the house involving Christina and Ms. Mercer and Melissa reached a violent and ugly climax. Melissa recounted the terrifying sequence of events with chilling clarity. There was a push and shove in the match. Chris got physical and I called the police. The situation, already tense, rapidly devolved into outright aggression. Chris attacked me in front of the police officers, and the police had to drag Chris off of me. Melissa vividly recounted, painting a scene of uncontrolled, brazen aggression even in the presence of uniformed authority. Christina's violent actions resulted in her immediate arrest, and she subsequently spent the night in jail, facing official charges for domestic assault. It was a public, undeniable manifestation of the private terror Lynn and Melissa had been enduring. This incident, undeniably a tipping point, a rupture in the delicate facade of family, finally provided Lynn with the sheer moral strength and necessary resolve to take decisive, albeit heartbreaking, action. She found the courage to assert firm boundaries for the absolute safety of herself and her household, effectively ending Elena and Christina's residency within her home. They were evicted for the safety of my mother, a necessary, albeit profoundly painful, decision that spoke to the extreme level of threat she faced, adding another crucial layer of legal protection. Lynn immediately secured a restraining order against both Elena and Christina, explicitly acknowledging the very real and present danger they pose to her and her other children, in a poignant, heartbreaking admission that laid bare the profound emotional toll this ordeal had taken. Lynn said she was scared to death, a powerful declaration underscoring the depth of her terror and the relentless emotional trauma exacted by her daughter's destructive behavior and her daughter's partner's violent tendencies. After more than a year of relentless tension, insidious threats, and escalating intimidation, Lynn experienced a measure of genuine relief to finally have Elena and Christina out of her home. The constant threat lifted, if only physically, but her profound maternal anxieties, deeply ingrained and ever-present, were far from fully assuaged. Her concern immediately, pivotally, and understandably transferred her precious granddaughter, Elena's child, the unstable, transient, and profoundly unhealthy existence led by Elena and Christina, moving restlessly between long-term rentals in hotels, where they would stay at one place for a month, move, stay at another hotel for a month, often resorting to live ing on someone's couch for a while, before again being compelled to move to another hotel. Deeply, profoundly worried Lynn. Her concern was specific and absolute, all the while dragging this child along with them. Lynn intuitively believed, and correctly so, that such an unstable, peripatetic, and dangerous environment was fundamentally unsafe for the impressionable, vulnerable toddler whose development and security were being so severely jeopardized. Driven by this profound, protective concern for her grandchild's well-being and long-term safety, Lynn took a momentous, legally significant step in August of 2012. She bravely went to court and formally filed for temporary custody of the then 20-month-old child. Lynn saw the situation as dangerous for the child because of the way they were living, her perspective rooted in practical observation, and a nurse's understanding of health and stability. And when Lynn's custody case proceeded to court that November, her fervent concerns and articulate presentation profoundly resonated with the judicial system. The presiding judge unequivocally concurred with Lynn's meticulous assessment of the perilous living situation. In a pivotal ruling, she went to court and was able to obtain custody of her granddaughter. It was a victory for the child's welfare, but one born of heart-wrenching necessity. This legal victory, however, was explicitly framed as temporary. Custody was granted to Lynn until such a time as Elena and Christina could definitively demonstrate a credible capacity to bring genuine, long-term stability to their lives, to actively establish an acceptable living situation for the child, and to ultimately achieve a state of overall stable well-being. This judicial directive provided a clear, albeit challenging, pathway for Elena and Christina to regain custody of their child, contingent entirely upon tangible, demonstrable changes in their lifestyle and circumstances. Spurred on by this pressing legal mandate, by the direct and severe threat of losing their child permanently, Elena and Christina made moves that initially suggested concerted, earnest effort toward compliance and reform. They married in October of 2012 and subsequently moved into an apartment in neighboring King George County. The apartment they had was the first stable housing they had had in maybe years, a critical step towards fulfilling the court's rigorous requirements. This visibly demonstrated effort, these nascent attempts at domestic responsibility, were, as was understood by those around them, all part of their efforts to get custody of this grandchild back. The hope, however faint, was that they were genuinely striving for change. But the chilling question lingered, an unspoken dread hanging heavy in the air. Would these ostensible efforts, these outwardly visible changes, truly be sufficient to convince the court of their renewed suitability as stable parents? Or, fueled by their deep-seated resentments, their pervasive sense of injustice, and their desperate desire for control and dominion over their own lives, had Elena and Christina decided, in a dark and terrible twist, to pursue a far more direct, a far more malevolent, and ultimately a far more deadly approach, one that sought not to genuinely reform, but rather to permanently remove the primary obstacle to their ambitions. Rather than genuinely address their profound internal instabilities? The answer, devastatingly and irrevocably, was not far off, and it would plunge the Mercer family into an abyss of unimaginable grief and unforgivable betrayal. Chapter 6. The Smirk of Discord and the Weight of Suspicion. The dawn of May 19th, 2014, brought forth a Monday morning, a time for renewed effort, a return to the structured routines of the work week after a quiet weekend. But for the Spotsylvania County Sheriff's Office, it marked not a return to normalcy, but the abrupt, grim beginning of a harrowing new reality. Less than 24 hours had agonizingly passed since sheriff's deputies had discovered Lynn, Mercer's brutally murdered body, in her home. The peaceful facade of the community, once considered impervious to such heinous acts, had been irrevocably cracked, replaced by the chilling, ever-present shadow of violent crime. Lynn's surviving family members, burdened by years of fraught, often explosive history and volatile, emotionally draining interactions with Elena and Christina, almost immediately honed in on Elena, Lynn's 25-year-old daughter, and Elena's wife, Christina Brown, as the prime suspects. Their shared conviction, born of painful experience, stemmed from the long, acrimonious, and emotionally destructive child custody battle over Elena's daughter, a conflict that had devolved into a bitter, winner-take-all struggle with profound emotional stakes, culminating in Lynn's protective custody of her granddaughter. In the initial stages of that protracted custody battle, Elena and Christina had presented a carefully constructed veneer of cooperation and commitment, striving overtly to stabilize their living situation in a bid to bolster their chances in the ongoing legal proceedings. They had secured an apartment, found multiple jobs, and even formalized their relationship with marriage, all ostensibly positive steps designed to present a compelling picture of domestic harmony, responsibility, and parental suitability to the court. However, their desperate, often ill-fated efforts to reclaim Elena's 3-year-old daughter suffered a crushing, ultimately definitive blow in April of 2014, merely a single, ominous month before her mother Lynn's brutal murder. Elena was arrested for prostitution. This was not only a serious legal setback, revealing a profound continuation of destructive behavior, but also a profoundly painful and deeply shameful revelation for the Mercer family, harshly exposing the tragic depths of Elena's struggles with substance abuse, financial desperation, and a harrowing willingness to compromise her dignity. Bob Mercer, Elena's father, articulated his anguish and disillusionment with heart-wrenching honesty and quiet resignation. You always have a father's love for your children. At the same time, I'm looking at a person that I know is dysfunctional, entirely dysfunctional. It was a recognition of a tragic truth, a profound lament for what his daughter had become. The judge overseeing the emotionally charged custody case unequivocally concurred with Bob's somber, damning assessment of Elena's functionality and suitability as a parent. The recent, highly incriminating arrest for prostitution, coupled with a well-documented history of pervasive instability, addiction, and emotional volatility, sealed Elena's fate in the courtroom, stripping her of any credible claim to parental fitness. Elena lost the last Circuit Court appeal in April of 2014, marking a definitive, final legal end to her official avenues for regaining custody of her child. The timing for the Mercer family was tragically stark, profoundly chilling, and undeniably synchronous, Mom was killed in May of 2014. This close chronological proximity, coupled with the long, bitter history of conflict and escalating threats, inexorably led the Mercer family to a horrifying, almost inescapable conclusion, one that twisted their hearts with unimaginable grief and revulsion. Elena and Christina had killed Lynn in a desperate, malevolent act to permanently eliminate the primary obstacle to regaining custody of Elena's daughter. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think possible that evil of them just played our troubles. But, it was true. A family member painfully confessed, reflecting the inner struggle against such an unspeakable thought, yet forced to acknowledge the chilling, undeniable congruence of events. We knew it was Elena and Chris just because of all the issues that had gone on, highlighting the deep-seated, intuitive understanding of their characters and their capacity for such an abhorrent act. Yet, from an objective, meticulously scientific, and legally unimpeachable investigative standpoint, a crucial, dispassionate question still hung in the heavy, accusatory air. After so many agonizing years of dealing with Elena's myriad self-destructive issues, was the family, however understandably grief-stricken and emotionally fraught, possibly jumping to conclusions, allowing their pain to guide their suspicions beyond the realm of concrete evidence? It was the investigator's solemn, professional duty to approach the case with unbiased eyes, to relentlessly seek concrete, empirical evidence that extended far beyond the powerful, yet purely emotional, logic of a grief-stricken family. On the morning of May 19th, the Spotsylvania County Sheriff's plainclothes detectives, keenly recognizing the profoundly sensitive nature of their impending visit to confront Lynn's daughter, requested a uniformed deputy to accompany them. Their destination, Elena and Christina's apartment in neighboring King George County, a short but significant drive from the crime scene. They were greeted by Christina and welcomed into the home, an ostensibly polite, albeit disconcertingly composed, reception given the unfolding circumstances. What they immediately encountered inside the apartment solved at least one pressing, immediate mystery. The detectives found that the child was okay and unharmed. The child is happy, healthy, running around the house. This sight provided a modicum of palpable relief, reassuring them that the innocent little girl, the unwitting pawn in this escalating family drama, was, at least physically, safe and sound. According to Elena, they had been caring for the child since Lynn went to work on Friday night, having had routine visitation rights from Saturday until Monday morning at 10. Indeed, Elena asserted that when the investigators knocked on her door, she had been in the exact process of gathering her daughter's things. As she was supposed to be meeting back with her mother to return the child, this narrative, if wholly true and unembellished, suggested Elena had no prior knowledge of her mother's horrific fate prior to the detectives' arrival, thereby throwing a complex, potentially exculpatory variable into the Mercer family's firmly held, accusatory convictions. At the kitchen table, amidst the domestic tableau of a healthy, active child, the plainclothes detectives delivered the devastating, world-shattering news. We at that time proceeded to sit down at the table and tell Elena that her mother had been killed. Elena's reaction, under such grave and unprecedented circumstances, was scrutinized with every fiber of the detective's professional observation. Elena was visibly upset. She did go to her knees. She made the sounds of somebody that was crying. It was a powerful, demonstrative display of profound grief, a seemingly genuine expression of sorrow from a daughter receiving the agonizing news of her mother's violent death. The emotional outpouring was unmistakable, lending initial credibility to her claim of ignorance. Christina's reaction, however, presented a strikingly, profoundly, and unnervingly different emotional landscape. While human beings indeed handle such horrific, life-altering information with a wide spectrum of deeply personal and varied emotional responses, Christina's demeanor stood out in stark, unsettling contrast to Elena's demonstrative grief. prompting immediate concern. Christina, the whole entire time we were there, had almost a smirk on her face. This disquieting expression, observed by seasoned law enforcement professionals trained to read subtle cues and emotional tells, was deeply troubling, raising immediate red flags. It hinted at a profound emotional disconnect, an almost perverse detachment from the immense gravity of the situation, making her a person of immediate and significant interest, if not outright potent suspicion, to the astute investigators. The lack of conventional empathy or shock was almost as alarming as the crime itself. Suspicious of Christina's odd demeanor, a behavioral anomaly that refused to be easily dismissed, the investigators subtly began their probing inquiries. Had either Elena or Christina been anywhere near Lynn's house in the last few days? Specifically on the night of the murder? Their response was swift, definitive, and seemingly rehearsed. The last time Elaine and Christine said that they were there was in 2012. They further claimed, with an almost too perfect consistency, that they hadn't even visited Lynn's home for routine child drop-offs or pickups for 2 years. Instead, as a matter of court-ordered protocol and for safety reasons. The police station is where all the exchanges were done. They had video cameras there, so it would have been a safe place for her to drop her daughter off. This critical detail about the exchange location served as a potential point of immediate verification or, conversely, a point of decisive refutation should surveillance footage reveal a discrepancy. If they hadn't been at Lynn's house on that fateful day, then where precisely had they been? Neither Elena nor Christina hesitated in answering this crucial question, providing detailed accounts that intertwined perfectly. They asserted that they had been home watching her child, watching Louise, on the day of the murder. Subsequently, on the following day, roughly in the morning, they had gone up to D.C. to Christina's family. This meant they effectively served as each other's unwavering alibi, their stories reinforcing one another in a seemingly impenetrable circle of corroboration. Remarkably, they offered tangible, documentary evidence to support their claims, displaying a preparedness that felt a little too neat. Sitting on the kitchen table, there was a stack of receipts, places that they had gone the day in question. These receipts, meticulously imprinted with dates and times, were promptly handed over to the investigators, ostensibly providing undeniable documentary corroboration for their narrative, a seemingly robust paper trail. Further, in a move that spoke either profound innocence or immense overconfidence, they readily granted the investigators permission to inspect their cell phones. Here, too, the results were seemingly benign, raising more questions than answers. Their phones were clean. There weren't very many messages. There weren't any pictures. The conspicuous absence of incriminating digital evidence, coupled with their detailed, synchronized alibi, presented a puzzle that baffled the initial line of inquiry. Yet, that strange smirk on Christina's face, a deeply unsettling incongruity in the stark presence of such tragedy, continued to gnaw at the veteran investigators. It was an exceptionally unusual, profoundly disquieting reaction, particularly given Lynn's profound role as a surrogate mother, a provider of shelter and succor to Christina herself for so many years. The stark contrast between Elena's demonstrative, if possibly theatrical, grief and Christina's almost smug, detached composure was simply too stark to ignore, too abnormal to overlook. This deeply unsettling behavioral anomaly fueled a tactical, psychologically informed question among the investigative team. Could they subtly provoke Christina into a more telling, less controlled reaction? A moment of unguarded truth? The investigators, employing a common, ethically sanctioned psychological technique often used in such high-stakes criminal circumstances, proposed a polygraph examination for both women. We asked Elena and Christina to come into the sheriff's office to take a polygraph, presenting it as a routine investigative step, a chance for them to definitively clear their names. To the detectives' controlled surprise, Both Elena and Christina agreed. They were cooperative throughout the whole process. This apparent willingness could be interpreted in multiple, contradictory ways. As genuine innocence, as naive overconfidence in their ability to deceive the test, or as a calculated gamble born of a misguided belief in their own manipulative prowess. The investigators, however, were prepared for all contingencies. To add an element of subtle psychological pressure and hoping to subtly unnerve Christina, the investigators strategically arranged for Elena to undergo the polygraph first, a decision designed to amplify the tension for the waiting co-conspirator. A detective, observing through a meticulously positioned two-way mirror from an adjoining room, vividly recalled the polygrapher's internal, nonverbal reactions. I wasn't part of the interview, but we get to watch the interview. And what they saw, what they observed in the trained polygrapher's nuanced expressions, subtly yet definitively validated all the Mercer family's suspicions. The polygrapher's nonverbal cues, his sudden intake of breath, the focused intensity in his gaze, his overall demeanor were unmistakable. You could tell from his eyes, he's like, geez. An unspoken confirmation that the test was indeed not going well for Elena. The scientific assessment, though not infallible, corroborated the subtle behavioral observations, creating a compelling, if circumstantial, convergence of evidence. She showed deception in the polygraph process, a clinical term for a lie detected. Following Elena's demonstrable failure of the polygraph examination, Christina's carefully constructed composure finally, decisively cracked. Her refusal to proceed with her own scheduled test was blunt, immediate, and profoundly telling. An implicit, almost desperate, admission of complicity. She said, for everybody here, she goes, well, if she failed, I'm going to fail. It was an overt, yet uneloquent, acknowledgement that her story, much like Elena's, contained a core deception, a kernel of untruth that would not withstand the scrutiny of the polygraph machine. However, despite the incriminating nature of a failed polygraph and a subsequent, bald-faced refusal to submit to the test, these findings alone were legally insufficient for an immediate arrest. A polygraph cannot be used against them in a court process, a legal limitation understood by all seasoned investigators. Reluctantly, adhering strictly to procedural law, the detectives had to release both women, their hands tied by legal technicalities, but their resolve burning with renewed certainty. Yet, the intuition of the experienced polygrapher, shared in a moment of quiet professional camaraderie, offered a powerful affirmation to the frustrated team. We all gathered back up in the office after that, and the polygrapher looked at me and goes, "You're on the right track. She's got to keep pushing." It was a moral victory, a psychological arrow finding its mark, even if immediate legal shackles remained elusive for the moment. Elena, despite escaping immediate arrest, would not, despite her mother's death, regain custody of her daughter either. This civil consequence, divorce from the criminal investigation, would proceed apace. Melissa recounted the agonizing ordeal of an emergency custody hearing, where she was thrust into the role of protector for her niece, forced to confront her sister and Christina, and essentially take custody of their child from them. The experience for Melissa was profoundly terrifying, laced with the palpable fear of her sister's unpredictable nature. Her fears were quickly, tragically validated. My sister, she was very angry. She told me, "You will not get away with this." The words, chillingly prophetic and laced with malevolent intent, underscored Elena's profound volatility and deep-seated capacity for revenge. Melissa, rightly fearing for her own personal safety after such an explicit threat, immediately went and filed for a restraining order, which of course is only good for, a couple days, she noted with weary resignation, highlighting the inherently fragile and temporary nature of such protections against determined malice. But even as the clock ticked down on that temporary protective order, its limited validity drawing rapidly to a close, the investigators were about to receive the absolutely critical, Game-changing breakthrough they so desperately needed. Justice, though often appearing agonizingly slow in its march, was beginning its relentless, unwavering advance. Chapter 7, The Red Dot Unveiled, a precise link to a purchased firearm. The fleeting days of Melissa's restraining order, while offering only temporary solace against a tangible threat, proved to be an utterly critical, providential window of opportunity for the Spotsylvania County Sheriff's Office. A seismic shift, a definitive turning point in the complex investigation, arrived courtesy of an anonymous but exceptionally detailed tip, channeled discreetly through the Crime Stoppers line. The crucial call originated from neighboring King George County, and its content was nothing short of extraordinary, a direct answer to so many lingering questions. We had a tip that came in from somebody in King George that sold Christina and Elena a gun. This single, revelatory piece of information, if meticulously accurate and verifiable, represented the absolute linchpin that could definitively, inextricably tie the two women directly to Lynn Mercer's brutal, premeditated murder. According to the informant, the man who claimed to be the seller, the specific weapon he had transacted to Christina and Elena was a 9mm pistol. This crucial detail immediately resonated with uncanny precision within the investigative team, as the ballistic evidence meticulously recovered from Lynn's home had already definitively indicated the use of a 9mm caliber weapon. This consistency was compelling, but the informant's testimony extended far beyond mere caliber identification. It included a unique, almost idiosyncratic, yet utterly vital, detail about the weapon's operational flaw, a mechanical peculiarity that would prove instrumental. The gentleman who sold the gun said there was a problem with the weapon, that he could never fire more than 4 shots through it consecutively without causing the gun to jam. This particularity, seemingly a minor and inconvenient defect, provided a chilling, almost supernatural echo to a perplexing forensic anomaly at the crime scene. He said if you fired that weapon 4 times, you would leave 4 bullets wherever you were shooting, 3 shell cases on the ground, and you would have a shell casing jammed in the gun when you left. This remarkably precise description of the weapon's functional characteristic was uncannily, painstakingly, and exactly consistent with the evidence in this case. The perplexing detail of only 3 spent shell casings being found at the scene, despite Lynn's body revealing 4 distinct bullet wounds, now made grim, undeniable, and chillingly logical sense. The missing 4th casing, the subject of an exhaustive, meticulous, and ultimately futile search within Lynn's home, was now accounted for. It was, according to the informant's description, jammed irrevocably within the murder weapon itself, an immovable piece of forensic evidence carried away, unseen, by the perpetrators as they fled the scene. This profound congruence between a specific, unique weapon defect and a unique, puzzling crime scene forensics was a kind of investigative golden thread, the irrefutable empirical link that rarely presents itself with such devastating clarity and precision. It was a scientific revelation that married the anecdotal with the analytical. The informant's invaluable assistance, however, did not cease with this operational detail. He provided another absolutely crucial piece of information, one that could definitively, unequivocally link the specific gun he sold to Elena and Christina directly to Lynn's murder weapon. He confided that before he ultimately sold them the gun, he had actually took the gun out in his backyard and test-fired it, ostensibly to check its functionality, or perhaps simply for personal target practice. And from this informal, impromptu test firing, he was significantly able to pick up casings from his property, the very same casings he then willingly surrendered to law enforcement. Crucially, these weren't conventional brass casings, the typical spent ammunition found at a firing range. And the casings weren't brass, they were steel. Even more specifically, these steel casings bore a unique and highly distinctive visual marker, one that resonated with profound familiarity to the detectives, I said. I looked down. I saw the red dot. There it is. This highly distinctive detail. The steel shell casings with red dots on the back exactly, perfectly matched the description of the unusual, non-standard ammunition discovered scattered at Lynn Mercer's brutal crime scene. The specificity was so precise, so unique, that it eliminated almost all doubt. The evidentiary chain, meticulously constructed by dedicated investigators, was tightening with astonishing speed, precision, and irrefutable scientific certainty. The investigators promptly and carefully arranged for the immediate retrieval of these crucial tests, fired casings from the informant's backyard, securing them as vital evidence. These, in turn, were then meticulously transported, under strict chain of custody, to the State Crime Laboratory, alongside the 3 distinct casings originally recovered from the crime scene for definitive comparative ballistics testing. The objective was crystalline, straightforward, and scientifically rigorous: to confirm beyond any reasonable doubt whether the unique, microscopic markings, the rifling marks, the ejector marks, the firing pin impressions on the spent cartridge cases from both locations matched, thereby proving conclusively that they were all ejected from the exact same weapon. The firearms section was able to compare those 2 sets of cartridge cases and conclude that they were fired from the same weapon. The results, when they came back with professional certainty on May 30th, provided an irrefutable scientific link, a definitive forensic bridge between the specific firearms sold to Elena and Christina and the exact murder weapon used to violently extinguish Lynn Mercer's life. The science